Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Big Kris Live, the live stream, and then the podcast available at all the usual spots, Apple Podcasts. Thank you for subscribing, rating. I have 2 ratings right now giving me 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and I thank you for the 5 stars, but I'll take more ratings with like a 3 or a 4-star. I mean, maybe even a 2 if you really feel that way. By all means, leave your feedback. Spotify also on there. DeanBlundell.com as well, all podcasts, and available via Big Kris Live on YouTube. And it's just available everywhere. DeanTube as well. Dean's got a tube. Yes, he does. My guest for episode 12 is one of the guests that I wrote down originally when I conceived this podcast. Jeff Woods is on the Zoom screen with us. Hello, Jeff.
How are you? Nice to see you. I'm well.
Oh, I know you're always well, Jeff. You always have a very calm, well sort of vibe about you.
You know what I say? There's a roof, there's food in the fridge, there's a dog next to me, there's a girl upstairs. What do I have to complain about?
Yes. And you have those lovely pipes, those God-given pipes of yours. Not many people have those genes and genetics. I'm just going to turn your volume up right now so we can hear it a bit more. You want to give us a read there, Jeff?
It's good to be king, if just for a while, Kris, to be there in velvet, to give him a smile.
There we go. Beautiful. Now, let me give you a bit of a background on Jeff Woods and how I know Jeff Woods. And you don't even know this story, Jeff. We've hung out multiple times, but this is actually going back to the beginning of my radio career. I was maybe 20, 21 years old. And there's a position in radio called the assistant music director. And as the assistant music director, you get to do all the jobs that the music director doesn't want to do, mainly dubbing in episodes of syndicated programming that are music-oriented and tracking the songs that were played for that syndicated show and making sure they're reconciled with our music library and what we played for regulatory reasons. It's all
very technical.
Yeah, that's a very very complicated way of putting it, but I could go deeper, as all radio folk could. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea. But as part of that, I had to dub in real time episodes of Jeff Woods' syndicated radio program. And, you know, everyone in my life, my family, my wife, my friends, always marvel, Kris, you have this incredible music knowledge. Where do you know all these stories from? And I never hesitate to say, Jeff Woods, man. It was just listening to those stories, making sure they ran on the air for our radio stations, and hearing your voice and your stories. That was like one of my very entries into rock and roll radio. And it was so cool that that I get to hang out with you now and get to know you in person over multiple hangouts. And so, dude, it's great to have you on, and welcome.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for all of that. Whenever I meet people, oftentimes, because some of them are a little bit younger than you and a lot younger than me, they say, driving with my mom and usually my dad, I learned about rock and roll in the car listening to your radio show, and I love that. That somebody in their now 20s or 30s, when they were 10 or 11 or 12, actually had an affinity for the music that I was playing, because then I played lots of 60s and 70s and some 80s and some 90s. But now I really stretch it out and I play some current music mixed with the decades of past. So it's more fun for me. But I love that kids love Hendrix and the Beatles and Zeppelin and the Who and all of that stuff.
It was, yeah. I mean, some of those stories, I mean, I always knew you sort of as a Beatles fan. That's what I always thought of you as through those stories, right? And then, of course, there's Records and Rockstars. You have a book out there which talks about a lot of the various, adventures that you've had and the people that you've had to meet. And it really is staggering, Jeff. I have to say it's impressive. And I'm sure it's not lost on you that not everyone gets to hang out with David Bowie in New York City. Not everyone, right?
You know, I got lucky. I got incredibly fortunate that my heroes as a 12, 13, 14-year-old became people I got to sit and speak with about music. I was in the right place at the right time, in the right era of radio and of the record label environment, when the Eric Claptons of the world and the David Bowies of the world were putting out albums fairly frequently, every couple of years. And the reason to sit down with people typically was, I've got a new record to talk about. It happens less and less with artists of that age. So now I speak to newer artists, and that has its own rewards, obviously, to speak to emerging artists who I believe in and may one day be of the, may have the reach that a David Bowie or an Eric Clapton had in their day.
Well, and that's one of the hangouts that we've had. One of the more memorable hangouts we had was judging a Battle of the Bands contest. And we got to see some great up-and-coming bands, right? I mean, that was a good time.
That was fun. Yeah, you know, Mike Charette was one of the judges with us, and he had won the year before. And we've become quite close because of our mutual love of music, like we all have. And the cool thing about Mike is about a year ago, we met for lunch, and he said, I'm thinking about changing my name. And I said, what have you got in mind? And he said, Jake Good. I said, I really like that. It's memorable with 2 syllables. It's easy. It kind of suits you because he's not a country artist and he's not a pop artist. He's just a great singer who has elements of both of those types of music and rock. And I said, when are you thinking of doing it? And he said, maybe in about 6 months. I said, do it tonight. Do it now. Do it today. He said, what do you mean do it now? I said, the biggest regret that people from CEOs to you and me have is that they knew what to do, but they didn't do it out of fear, self-doubt, whatever the reasons. If you really feel strongly about something, do it now. Don't wait.
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny when you talk about names and nicknames, and that's something I think I'm missing from radio in 2021 is there's not a lot of nicknames. There's a lot of one-name radio hosts. Hey, it's Kris. Hey, it's Fred. You know, whatever you want to pick, right? And you know, I remember there was just these transient clubhouses of rock and roll radio, or even pop stations back in the day where, you know, you'd roll in for 6 months and you'd just party with these guys and gals and just, you know, and just have a great time. And everyone had a nickname and the radio station felt like a clubhouse, you know, and everyone's blowing a doobie in the parking lot. You know, it's, I mean, I never really, I caught maybe a bit of the tail end of that. But I think, you know, nicknames are still fun. I still think they're great, or pseudo names or anything like that. You know, I
had one back in the early 90s.
Did you?
Because the original Bear out of Edmonton, Alberta, 100.3 The Bear. It's been so long. We had bear-like names. There was Sled Dog Michaels, and there was...
Oh, yeah, I love that. I love that.
Grizzly Woods, which I shortened to Grizz and morphed to Griswold, which I found more appealing.
Right.
And there was Smokey Samuels, Eric Samuels, who ran the station. It was goofy, but it was, to your point, it was fun. It was like a clubhouse. We were a gang.
Yeah. Yes.
I like the fact that we use our real names, though, now, so that when you do write a book, you're not the Dirty Duker was got a book out. It's your actual name.
Yeah. You know, my nickname, Big Kris, you know, I go Kris, or, you know, I don't really care, like, if people use the nickname or not. You know, I remember Humble Howard was on a couple episodes back, and he says, I think I have to refer to you as, like, in the third person. Hello, Big Kris. Yes, Big Kris wants this. Big Kris wants that. But I don't know if you knew this radio host, Jeff. He was an old school guy, too. He did some time in Toronto and Montreal mostly. Went by the pseudonym of Andy K. And you know Andy?
Of course.
Or you did know Andy? Yes.
My first gig in Halifax, I did evenings and he did afternoon drive.
Wow. Well, he's the one who coined Big Kris. And I'll tell you, when I was 20, again, that young music director guy we mentioned earlier, you know, when I was in that phase of my career, he was a guy who really took some time to teach me about some of the old school ways and the old school radio techniques. And I'd sit in the studio, watch him do a morning show on an AM oldie station back then in 2001, 2002. And just to see how this guy operated. And of course, we'd hang out and he'd teach me things about the importance of Van Morrison, the importance of Tom Waits. And he, you know, at the time I started calling myself Kris with a K, because it is Kris with a K. But people hated it. I started getting hate mail, Jeff.
Why?
hate mail. They hated Kris with a K. People, I don't know. It annoyed people that I would have to point out that it had a K. That's what they would say. They would call me up. One guy wouldn't leave me alone. He said, "Yeah, Kris with a K. Might as well be jerk with a J." Click, and then hung up on me.
Nice.
The fax machine. Remember fax machines at radio stations? That was rolling with Kris with a K comments all the time. And I said, I got to change this. This is driving me crazy. And he's like, call yourself Big Kris. And I'm like, okay, or how about Big Kris Bodden, BKB, you know, that alliteration of the B's, and you're a huge guy. Back then I was like 400 pounds, 450 pounds, you know, and he's like, Big Kris. He's like, you know, everyone will know who you are at the party. Hey, which Kris is it? It's Big Kris. It's always, you know who you are. And he mentioned another old school guy, Too Tall, at Chaume in Montreal, which was a classic station that out of Montreal. And he says, you know, everyone would go to a live event and they would know who Too Tall was. He was 7'1". He stood above everybody. And so that was the birth name. I've never told that story on mic ever, so I'll tell it here with you, Jeff. But yeah, that's the story of Big Kris right there.
I like it. Thanks for sharing. And rest in peace, Andy Kay. I believe he did die some years ago. He was tightly wound in the studio, but that's like the pot calling the kettle black. I was too. And part of that was, and you know, you get over that, but part of it is your fear of not being good, your fear of failing. If there was extraneous noise, he would go crazy. If you were in there getting records or putting new records in the racks, because I was an assistant music director, gopher like you were, he would get out of control. And I said, dude, chill. We're all on the same team. Relax, do your show. And then we didn't have video. No one could see what you were doing. It was all audio. So just chill the F out. And but rest in peace, Andy Kay. What was his real last name? Do you remember even?
Kuhn or Kuhn. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but
therein lays the need to change your name.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. That's where it all comes from, right? Yeah. To start being real, people can be able to figure out what happened to this guy, right? To be able to, you know, I'm sure there's a ton of people who used to listen to him on the air, right? Who were curious and they can never find what happened or where he went, you know, and right. That's a sad thing, right? But that's, again, you come from that era, Jeff. You got to meet all those artists, and now you're in the habit of promoting new artists. You've got a Wildwood studio that I followed on Instagram. Is that where you're sitting right now? It looks cool. You're behind a drum kit and everything.
Yeah, the drums are right over here, obviously, and the vintage stereo gear is right over here on this rack, and there's albums 300 or 400 above me.
Yeah.
And then over there, there's seating for like 35, 40 people. And the stage is 12 by 14, so we can put a full-sized band in. My library's over the stage left. It's a great room. And it's attached to a home where my partner lives with her kids.
Oh, and you know, that's the other thing. Speaking of Instagram, you look happy as anything, man. I've never, like, there's so many great, and I'm expecting as well this April, we're going to be having a daughter, my first, you know, which is thank you. Yeah, it's exciting. So, you know, I've got these family vibes, man. It's great to see you getting a little family vibe yourself.
Oh, thank you. And congrats, because I saw the picture of your mom and you pointing out that it would be her first grandchild, and that's got to be so exciting for her.
It is. It's big. It's a big deal for my family, man. We're a small bunch. We're a very, very small clan, right? So,
well, I've got a ready-made family. I didn't ever have kids of my own, but I think there's great value to that, because I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready till now, in my mid-50s. So I've got a 9-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 16-year-old stepchildren.
Oh, wow.
And I love it. I mean,
you looks like you do, man.
What's not to love? 3 smart, sweet, kind, generous, interesting, and creative kids.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I'm excited to get to that age. I don't want to miss a thing, and to quote Aerosmith, but you know, I don't. But also, you know, that's the kind of age range I think I'm going to accelerate at, teaching things, and especially when it comes to music. And you know, our niece is just turning 7 soon, and you know, I'm just really starting to enjoy time with her, where she's interested in music, or maybe she is, maybe she isn't. You never know that at that age, right? But I you know, I'm hoping to impress upon her, you know, the musicality end of things, and you know, so that's the exciting part for me. So yeah, I can see that you're sort of in that mode too.
Well, you know, people say, you know, what about advice? And when it comes to kids, I say, just be you, and let them be them. and they will
Yes.
take from you what they take from you. We don't have to push anything on them.
Mhm.
They will inevitably gravitate to some of the stuff we would hope that they do, and they'll gravitate to some of the stuff we can't believe they're gravitating towards. But so be it.
Well,
It's their path.
I saw somebody gravitate behind the drum kit on your Instagram. Actually, it's like some musicality seeping in there too.
He's good, and August, the boy, he's become a great guitar player. We bought him a really good guitar, an Ibanez, last Christmas, with a whammy bar, and we didn't put the whammy bar on. We said, this is kind of a neat. When you get more comfortable with the simplicity of this string guitar, you can maybe try that. So a year later, sure enough, he put it on, and he's just intuitively, wow, like he's intuitively Jeff Beck.
Just vibratoing out of the sky. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. So let kids be kids, but it's kind of cool to fill a room with instruments and see what they pick up. And Jemima, the youngest, is really going to be a great drummer.
Oh wow, yeah. Well, they've got the setup, and of course, having all these musicians come, or hopefully when the pandemic, sort of winds down, having a lot more activity at Wildwood Studio. I mean, having more musicians show up. I mean, that's going to be great too, right? Just the whole environment of it all.
It really is. I'll tell you before we complete this session, which I'm thankful that we're doing. By the way, I haven't really adopted Zoom for my own content yet, but I'm going to after today, because I love the way it feels. So thank you. But I'll tell you about my plans that are a couple weeks away from coming to fruition as it relates to bringing bands in here and a YouTube channel, blah, 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 blah. So please, before we finish, let's talk about that. What else?
Obviously I wanted to talk about you and our connection and everything, but also, we can't avoid the current affairs. I mean, I even had 4 guys on doing a podcast about wrestling a few episodes back. And even off the top, I said, hey, we got to talk about what's going on in America. And that was the night of the insurrection at the Capitol, and last night was the big show of the inauguration, Jeff, and there was a lot of those artists that you've probably met or interviewed or hung out with or everything. I see Bon Jovi, Bruce Springsteen, and I started thinking about all of the Joe Biden haters, if you will. I started thinking about MAGA and QAnon and what kind of music those guys must listen to. And I'm like, wait a second, they probably listen to a lot of Bon Jovi. It must suck. It must suck to have your favorite artist think you're a piece of shit. No?
I think it might be lost on certain people.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I think if your mind goes where the minds of the people that stormed the Capitol goes, we can't expect a lot from those people.
True.
On any level. I'm just really happy. I posted something today that somebody had created, a meme as it were, and it said the kid with the stutter is in and the bully is out, basically. So I much prefer the Bidens of the world as opposed to the Trumps of the world. And absolutely, policy matters. What the decisions they make matter. Put that aside for a second. The tone of your presence also matters a hell of a lot. And if your tone is bully, if your tone is harsh, if your tone is acrimonious, if your tone is telling the media to shut up so you can take a question that serves your personal purposes better, I'm really happy things are the way they are. And that aside, those 2 guys aside, those personalities aside, having the first female vice president is not lost on most of us. It's a great move. Yeah. We had an African-American president, massively positive move. It represented the country in which they were looking for leadership. How until now did it not happen? Doesn't matter. It happened. And now a female. It's a positive change. I love it.
Yeah. And there's sometimes, Jeff, I'm a bit of I hate the term now, centrist, but there's sometimes I roll my eyes at a lot of the liberalisms of the world, but I also, I much prefer, even if we're in my opinion, sometimes a little overly sensitive. I much prefer that to the alternative, and, I think it is. I mean, the orange man's gone. Ding dong, the witch is dead. That's the way I feel about it.
Eric Shankman is a great musician who've had into the studio to do the podcast some months ago. And Eric Shankman was the guitarist from the Spin Doctors, big 90s band. And Eric wrote a great song called Agent Orange. And as you might imagine, it disparaged the obvious, and he sang it in my studio on an acoustic guitar, and he beat the living hell out of that guitar, and he pre-COVID, and he spat the lyrics out with great venom and passion, and I just applauded it, obviously, because it struck a chord with me. Get rid of the bully, get rid of Agent Orange, say hello to a new day of humanity and decency and kindness. We don't make fun of people with impediments. We don't make fun of women because they're women. These are truths we know to be valid.
Yeah, we learned them in the second grade. Just be nice to people.
Do unto others kindness.
Yes. Yeah, we learned a bit, and maybe if for not second grade for some people, maybe it's Sunday school as well, right? Like pretty basic decency wrapped up into some of that.
I would hope.
I had Kim Mitchell on the podcast a while back, and I know that I've had a lot of interactions with Kim over the years in the course of my broadcasting career. But you were probably there, right when he was like the Max Webster and him as a solo act and everything. You must have been right in on that. And we all know how big of a deal he is in Canada, and I'm sure you can go on forever about what a gem he is, right?
Sure.
But when you think of Canadian artists, Kim Mitchell's for sure at the top of the pile in terms of success and adoration. But who's an underrated Canadian musician? Who's underrated in our scope of bands and acts that you've seen through the course of your career?
The term you use, underrated, is a term I've used so many times. And just as I hear it again, I start to think that all artists are rated as they're rated, and it's okay. I'd like to think of it more as, who do I have a passion for that maybe I could turn somebody on to? Because sometimes there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. And some bands have some of the pieces, but not all the ones that will lead to them rising in this country or internationally. The Hip had all the pieces that worked in Canada, not the pieces that worked in America. Rush had pieces that worked around the world, but it took a bunch of albums to get there. A band that I love, have great passion for, but their albums haven't quite translated to the success of their live shows. Their success as a live band can be conveyed in this way. Every New Year's Eve, except for the one that just passed, they have played the Horseshoe for the last 20 years. The Sadies, two brothers, Dallas and Travis Good, with a rhythm section that's second to none, with a stand-up bass and a smoking drummer in Mike Politsky. The Sadies are as musical, as creative, and as adept on their instruments as any band's ever been. I would say that's the band, if you want to use the term underrated, let's go with that is most underrated. But they have to be seen live to be appreciated, and preferably in a room of 200 or 300 people capacity. I did see them open for Neil Young, though, because Neil Young's a huge fan. Neil Young and Crazy Horse did 3 or 4 dates that included the Sadies some years ago, 2012, 13. And the Saddle Dome show, the Sadies opened for Neil Young, and it couldn't have been a better marriage of music, because Crazy Horse is great guitar rock, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. The Sadies, much the same. Both brothers play lead guitar, which is rare. The 2 front men both playing lead guitar, and they're both 6'3", 4, 5. I don't know. They're giants on stage, and they wear cowboy clothes. And Travis not only plays lead guitar, but he plays the fiddle. And they're insanely good, and they play the music that is both rockabilly, psychobilly, country, bluegrass, surf, blues, rock, the roots music largely, right?
Yeah.
So see the Sadies when we're allowed to see concerts again, hopefully later in 2021.
I can remember distinctly seeing the Sadies, and I can tell you the show, the concert. I know who is on the bill, the whole thing. Yeah, it was Sadie's with Hugh Dillon Redemption Choir. That's before the Headstones got back together. Matthew Good and the Tragically Hip were headlining. It was the Across the Causeway show in Kingston, where they were doing a big thing, big fundraiser thing to get the arena finally built in Kingston. And I will never forget that show because I believe there was a stand-up bass being played. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Sean plays stand-up bass, and he does so extremely well.
Yeah, so that's the one time I've seen them, but now upon you recommend, Jeff, I will for sure listen. There's going to be a boom of live show activities once this pandemic thing is over with. I'm going to see a show probably. Well, I'm going to have a baby daughter, so I don't know how many shows I'm going to see, but I'm going to be itching to see a show every night of the week probably.
When she's 1 or 2, you'll be able to, I don't know what the age is, you'll be able to get a babysitter and go to shows again.
Yes, I hope so. Yeah, I'm hoping so. That'll be a negotiation as well, I'm sure.
Somebody pointed out something that I think is incredibly valid and food for thought. There'll be so many bands dying to play live after the pandemic allows so.
Sure.
There'd be a lot of co-headliners because too many bands, not enough nights in a year. So it'll be A-lister and A-lister co-headlining. Tickets will be expensive, but you'll get to sort of have 2 concerts in one night.
Yeah, it'll be half. Yeah, there's no going to see this band at this venue. It's going to be where it's going to see this group of bands who are touring together, like no other bands have toured together before at this one giant venue.
Festivals will be bigger than ever, I think, next summer 2022.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Jeff, I like you. I've had my turn around the markets of radio and rock radio, and at least in Ontario, you're a bit more on a national scale. But I always thought that Hamilton had the best, at least in Ontario. I love Kingston. Trust me, I do love Kingston, and a case could be made that they have an incredible music scene and the tops. But I'm going to go with Hamilton on this one. Just my opinion. I think they got the best music scene in Canada. All due respect to Winnipeg and Vancouver and a few other spots. You're maybe not asking you to corroborate that, but your thoughts on that scene in general.
I'm a big fan of the music that comes out of Hamilton. Let me underscore that idea with 2 examples. Think of, he's originally from Hull, Quebec, but he, as a younger man with his brother Bob, started a studio called Grant Avenue. They almost had enough money to do it, but they didn't have quite enough, so they got in touch with a friend named Michael Burke, and Michael Burke lent them, I think, $7,000 or $8,000, and that was just enough to buy this place, to open this studio, and they would do jingles and commercials, and then they started producing bands. Do you know who that would be, that producer of great fame now, today?
Is it Daniel Lanois?
It's Daniel Lanois.
Hey, I win.
Ding, ding.
What do I win, Jeff?
You win a Swanson TV dinner.
Nice.
So Dan Lanois, and then he met Brian Eno, and they did, I think, music for the soundtrack to Dune. I think that was the 80s, early 80s. And then they started collaborating as co-producers with U2 on the Unforgettable Fire album. And that led to a career that included productions in the 80s of Peter Gabriel and Robbie Robertson and Bob Dylan. And there's 100 more. And to me, Daniel Lanois and Hamilton are intertwined in that way, although he's lived, Toronto,
he's lived all over, at all the greatest places,
New Orleans and Europe. And then the second person, who I think is Mr. Hamilton, without a doubt, would be Tom Wilson.
Yep.
When you think of an artist with a capital A, who greater than Tom Wilson from Hamilton in that a great band leader, a great songwriter, a great collaborator, a great frontman, an incredible poet, an incredible author, an incredible fine artist in that he paints prolifically, everything from oils to acrylics to.
Oh, you've got a painting up in your studio, or you did at one time.
Can I do this? Let's see.
Yeah, sure you can.
There
we are. Yeah.
A diptych, as it were, 2 pieces that are side by side to create one. That's my second piece I bought from Tom over the years.
Yes.
When I started the studio, Wildwood's Blue here, I thought to myself, In terms of art, I have to have a Tom Wilson. So there it is. I called him and said, "Could you do me a painting?" He said,
Oh,
why don't I do you two? I paid for it because I believe no matter what your
yeah, of
relationship is with the artist, he might have given me a deal.
course.
Tom's great, and his bands. Let's think of that. Here's the weird, goofy thing: is that back when I was in college, every Friday afternoon it was pub afternoon, and they'd have live music. I remember seeing the posters. I was like 19 years old. It said Tom Wilson and the Florida Razors, and I thought that was the goofiest name, and I never went. What a huge mistake. So,
Right.
so fast forward, that was like 83, 84. Fast forward to 93, 94. There's a band called Junk House coming to do an interview in my studio in Edmonton. And it's the same guy. I put it together. That's the Tom Wilson from the Florida. And I fell in love with Junk House. There it is. An album that represents Hamilton to me more than any other album would be the debut album from Junk House called Strays. Songs like Praying for the Rain, Out of My Head, Jesus Sings the Blues, which Springsteen is a huge fan of.
Yeah. Oh, really? Eh?
Yeah, and then Tom forms Blackie and the Rodeo Kings with Colin Linden, Grammy-winning guitar player, and Stephen Fearing, an incredible collaborator songwriter.
Love Stephen Fearing. I've got a ton of his solo records, a live album he did in the late 90s. Yeah, big fan of Stephen Fearing myself.
He's a sweetheart. All three of them are. So, and then Tom has the other band, the alter ego known as Lee Harvey Osmond, and which is funny, but it's also a great band.
Yeah.
And Tom's son. Have you ever seen Thompson Wilson play?
Yeah, I've actually seen, yes, one time. So Tom Wilson did a trip with our radio station down to Jamaica, like one of those radio station trips where the listeners all get to hang out with Tom on vacation kind of thing.
I love it.
So he brought his whole family and Ray, and Ray was there and I think they did some shows. Yeah, I think they did some shows down in Jamaica. I was not quite at the career point where I got to go on the trip. I was the guy who had to do the morning show while everyone was away, hold it down back then. Right. So I didn't get to go, but I did get to know them because they came and hung out at the station a whole bunch. So yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't say enough good things about Tom Wilson. He's a legend. We used to hang out a lot when I was a record company rep in southern Alberta. I would rep Junk House, and we'd go and do shows all over places like Medicine Hat and Lethbridge and Red Deer and Edmonton and Calgary. And they were a fun band to tour with. It was a double bill then too. It was Headstones and Junk House co-headlining everywhere we went. Imagine that after show.
Well, and think of, in the moment, it's just, hey, we're doing these shows with this other band that's good too. But then you look back on it and it's like, man, that's a great Canadian classic double bill.
Sure it is.
When you put those two together. You were talking about the album Strays from Junk House. And I actually, I agree. It has that Hamilton. It really set that Hamilton sound, right?
I think so.
But I think, and I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure Tom Wilson told me one time that the album artwork was actually done in Kingston because he had lived in Kingston for a time. And there was a street of a row of townhouses, and that's where the wires on the album artwork were taken. I'm not 100% on that, but I think so.
There is something I can't shed light on, but that sounds plausible. I like the idea. Kingston, Hamilton, two great Canadian rock towns.
Yeah, for sure.
With universities or colleges.
Yeah, the university helps too, I think, when it comes to, getting indie shows underway and people willing to go out and do things too. That's the other thing, to just have active scenes of people who will go out and do things and spend, $5 on a ticket or whatever. Back to the Hamilton scene though, my time living in Hamilton was a different era and a different boom of Hamilton music, because I remember the Arkells listening to their second album as I was driving into Hamilton moving. And that was that second album. And, their first album, of course, is amazing. And it's still one of my favorites, but, it was really that rise to fame where the live shows were getting bigger and you could just feel this momentum about them. But it was still at the point where I could do an indie comedy show at a laundromat, or at a small pub. And all of a sudden there's Max from the Arkells working the door at this small pub that I'm doing comedy at. Right. So, that's always when I think of Hamilton, I think of the Arkells. And of course I think of Monster Truck. Jer from Monster Truck was, when I was on the air in Hamilton, was a regular on the show, and I think like Monster Truck, if there's one band that just decided we're to be as rock and roll as possible. It had to have been Monster Truck, I think. One of the greatest, I think, Canadian acts to come out over the last while.
Yeah, there's an element like the Darkness out of England. There's an element of parody almost, but it's an entertaining show.
Yeah. Now, the rock and roll lifestyle is something I want to talk about, Jeff. A lot of people, use, like, you've been hearing a lot of people, like, I think even Gene Simmons has said, rock and roll is dead. There's some prominent figures out there, that have said some things like that. And I don't know, jury's out on whether rock and roll is dead or not. And I'm not going to pin you on that question, but
no, dude.
Okay, all right. Is it dead, Jeff? I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, I just think it's like a cliche question, but sure, why not?
It's a slogan. Let's start with that. Rock and roll, punk rock, rock. It depends how you define it, and it depends what your intention is when you say things like that. To me, rock and roll still is best attributed to the music of the 1950s that started with Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and all the others, but those are the pillars. That's rock and roll music. The Beatles had an album called Rock and Roll Music where they covered all of those cats and Carl Perkins and all the rest. That's rock and roll. Guitar, bass, drums, vocal is rock and roll. Maybe some piano. Originally, the guitar was the saxophone, but as rock and roll evolved, it was a guitar-based music. That's rock and roll. It's an attitude too. We talk about punk rock not necessarily being three-chord rock played by the Sex Pistols or the Clash or Green Day in more modern times, but by an attitude. As Joe Strummer was more than anyone about the attitude.
He's the patron saint of punk rock attitude, and
Thank you. It was also to do with do it yourself. Here's where the transition came, I think, as it relates to rock and roll. When computers became a thing in your home and bands more than ever had this DIY, do it yourself ability because of a computer. And the bass and the drums and the guitar and the vocals would change, and they've changed more than ever in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, because instead of having 4 or 5 people in a room laying down bed tracks or playing together as they did in the 50s and 60s in Motown, everybody at the same time playing like it's on records too, and recording it, and there's your record. In the 70s, we started multi-tracking, but still originally there would be guys in a room together playing the bed tracks, layering on till you had a complete album. That is less and less the case now. A lot of drums, as you know, are produced by machines. There's sampled sounds that you can choose. Oh, I like the sound of that drum. And then you start adding it and layering it. And what you have is less of a rock sound. We don't have that 90s crunchy guitar, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and 50 other bands that mattered in the 1990s. We don't have that
came
guitar.
from tube amps. And nobody, I mean, half of that was tube amps too, I think, back in the day. Nobody uses a tube amp anymore.
There's that. And I think that when people talk about the rock and roll being dead, what they're really doing is, if consciously or otherwise, noting that records that sound like that are fewer and further between. There's more records that sound like this drums that aren't real, that they're real sounds, but they're taken off a menu in a computer and added to your song. There's 2 people in a room, maybe one's the producer, Billie Eilish. She's singing and they're writing, and he's playing with the computer in Pro Tools and layering these sounds. And they don't sound like rock bands in a room. Joe Walsh articulates it better than I ever could. Where's the guys in the room, or girls, playing together? That is that there's something organic, and there's something real, and there's a heartbeat in that. There's less of a heartbeat when you start layering sounds that you didn't even create in a computer. So rock is dead to that degree. But there's still lots of that other stuff going on. It's just not as often represented in the mainstream radio as it was.
And maybe that's it. Is it also, like, it's not as represented on just award shows, or the bands that are winning best rock album on award shows aren't bands with that heartbeat that you're talking about. They didn't record that way. They, once in a while you see someone like Queens of the Stone Age or the Foo Fighters or the Chili Peppers, but again, those are legacy bands. That's built into the contract that they get considered at least to be on the Grammys or at the Super Bowl. But there are no new acts really, I think, that are unfortunately getting that exposure, and it trickles all the way down to mainstream radio formats too, in that you don't have a lot of rock stations. It used to be every small town had a country station and a rock station, you know, and that's less and less now. And it's unfortunate, but it's a symptom of it. But it's also, I think, too, confirm or deny, Jeff, you know, that we've splintered rock and roll down to so many niches of audiences, whether it's, you know, and they aren't getting serviced by what you would describe as a mainstream rock station, in that you have, you know, let's say just 18,000 different subgenres of punk rock, you know, that don't get even played or considered to be played on mainstream radio. Or you've got, you know, 18,000 different genres of heavy metal that don't even have a shot of making it onto mainstream radio. The window is so thin that you've actually killed your overall rock audience by a death from a thousand cuts, by all these subgenres that you're not servicing, right? But again, I can understand from a programming perspective that some of them don't jive, you know, some you can't make it all jive.
There's validity to all of what you've said, but there's also Sirius XM, where you have 5 or 6 hip hop variations. You have 5 or 6 hard rock variations. You have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 pop variations. You have as many country variations. And then you have your Beatles channel and your Petty channel and your Springsteen channel and your U2 channel and your Dylan channel. And it goes on and on and on. There is variety there. And then you have playlists from streaming companies where you can get that variety and you can get what you're into. So I think it's fragmented, to your point. Great word. And we have way more distractions in the world. We have gaming, which is bigger than ever. Yeah. We have Netflix. We have Crave. We have a lot of things to direct our attention towards. Yeah. But I think everything is represented. Somebody defined niche, which just means small. There's a lot of small buckets compared to back in the day. We had the rock station and the pop station and the adult easy listening station and the country station and then talk station. Now we've got it all. I love it all. You know, it depends on your mood. I love hip hop like the next guy. When I hear people my age, 50 something, and older and younger, disparaging what they still refer to as rap music. Like, really? Like, this is 2020? Has a rap
record ever been released? I don't even know anymore.
It's hip hop music. It has rhythm. It has vocals. Like it, don't like it, but don't disparage it. Just move on and celebrate what you want to celebrate. Everyone likes a fountain more than they like a drain. Stop shitting on the stuff that you don't mock. What you don't understand is what I say. If you're still calling it rap music, you don't even quite understand what you're saying. Because dollars to donuts, you go with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whoever you're with to a nightclub and a song comes on and everyone loves it, including you. And you dance to it and you move to it and you have fun to it. Chances are it might be a rap song or hip hop song or a dance song or it could be anything. If it moves you, it's good. If it doesn't, go on to the thing that you like.
You know, I'll admit I have cut a rug to Gangnam Style. All right.
It's pretty funny. It's really funny. One of the most viewed videos in the history of videos.
Exactly. There's a reason why, right? You can't deny it sometimes.
It's silly. It's fun. You can dance to it.
Yeah, it's a great Friday driving home from work song, you know, like, hey, sexy lady.
But my kids upstairs love it. They play it for me with some frequency because it's just silly, goofy kid stuff.
Yeah.
Kids of all ages.
So, yeah, is rock and roll dead? It's like the answer is sort of, I guess, you know, that's really.
It depends how you look at it. No, it's not dead. And yes, it is dead. It depends what your sensibility is and what your definition is. Yeah. I hate the term. Again, guys my age. Hey, I'm really into rock and roll. I don't like any of that rap. Stop, please. Rock and roll is a 50s music if you want to be a textbook about it. And kind of I do when you talk like that.
Yeah. That would make if you're going by that definition, then I guess Led Zeppelin's heavy metal. You know, that's you know, but by today's standards, Led Zeppelin is just like mainstream classic rock. It's so funny how definitions change over time too. Like you think about Black Sabbath, their first record blowing everyone's minds, right? But by today's standards, I mean, Ozzy's just like this old guy on TV. Like nobody really, nobody thinks he's the Prince of Darkness anymore, but there's all these other bands that could, that have doubled down on whatever Black Sabbath did and multiplied it by such a force.
It's funny when I think about Black Sabbath more than anyone else, though, while bands have done it arguably louder, certainly faster. Those are the only things I can attribute to bands that have done it differently. But no one's done it darker, bigger, and bolder than those Sabbath records. They were scary darkness. That defined everything that was to come in that dark metal kind of, and of course they weren't dark in and of their own character, but the sounds were certainly dark, and those records stand up, and those records are brilliant. And Ozzy, before he became the cartoon character, and I don't say that in a disparaging way, because he knows more than anyone how funny he can be.
Yeah.
But his vocals were perfectly matched with the guitar, bass, and drums of the other guys in Black Sabbath. They were as dark and foreboding as anything on vinyl, and I love it all. So I don't think anyone has outdone Sabbath for that.
Very well.
For that.
Very well. And here's the other thing too. You talk about how dark and foreboding those records are. I've got a lot of them on old vinyl, but again, it's old, poorly taken care of vinyl because I got it for free out of a trash bin somewhere probably. but it makes it even creepier when you've got those really dark, dank sounds or silence for a few minutes and the record's really scratched and you get that all that interference is going on. That makes it creepier. It's like poltergeist, like the TV is, yeah, I agree. Those are frightening records, right?
I do love them a lot.
Yeah. Now, one of those bands that, again, was a very active, very fast, heavy band, Motorhead. And, I read this story the other day, and this is where I was heading with, is rock and roll dead? I don't know the answer to that question. We tried to answer it here, and I think there was a good answer there. But the rock and roll lifestyle, I think for sure is dead, right? Like nobody's living like Lemmy from Motorhead anymore. Nobody's living like Iggy Pop and all these legendary, party animals have in those decades, right?
Not even Iggy Pop is living like Iggy Pop did.
Yeah, he's in the game.
He would have long been dead, and he would be the first to admit that. That is a good thing that's happened, because when you look at, well, it started in 1970 with the deaths, 71 with the deaths of Jimmy first, a couple weeks later Janis, a year later Jim Morrison. The 27 Club was established that Robert Johnson had started decades earlier. And then the 90s, I jump right to the 1990s. Well, there were lots of examples of young people living too hard and dying. Names that we know and names that we don't know. Tommy Bolin. Who knows Tommy Bolin? Who knows Danny Whitten from Crazy Horse? They didn't rise to the heights that Neil Young did or that Richie Blackmore did, bands that included these guys, because before they could, they were dead of heroin, typically, or alcohol. Bonzo and Keith Moon did rise to that height, but died in their 30s. Sad, right? But I go to the 90s because that was the most darkness concentrated.
For sure.
Right?
Musically too, and thematically, plus all the drugs and everything, right?
All the drugs and all the deaths in Alice in Chains and in Soundgarden and in Nirvana and Andrew Wood from Mother Love Bone and on, and Blind Melon and between alcohol and heroin, largely, countless deaths. More recently, Chris Cornell of Soundgarden, drug-related.
Scott Weiland finally caught up with him too.
Weiland was an accident waiting to happen, finally did, and from Linkin Park, Chester Bennington, another one. So many, and thankfully, to your point, less and less now. I think it's partly that people have woken up and decided that's not a way forward. No matter how creative you were in those flashes of brilliance, you can't thank the alcohol and the drugs for it. It just happens that you had some moments of clarity mixed with moments of darkness and drugs and booze. Listen, I don't know about you, but I'll speak for myself. I don't regret the amount of alcohol I consumed and the amount of drugs I did when I was in my teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, and even into my 50s. I can't, because I can't regret. You can't go back. You can't fix it. If I could do it all again, mind you, I would probably read more than I would drink beer.
Right.
I would be smarter. I would be younger looking. Cigarette smoke and alcohol does your skin and your liver no favors.
Yeah.
The darkness is thankfully lesser now. But then again, and I think the number I read the other day, as it relates to suicides year over year since the pandemic started, early 2020, I think it was Western Canada, it might have been Edmonton, but there was a statistic, pardon my, 7 times more suicides since pandemic. And whether it's 2 or 3 or 7 or 12, that's scary. So the darkness may not be attributed specifically to drugs and booze, that rock and roll found so many people dead, but mental health is one that we at least talk about. It always existed, but now we're talking about it. Mental health hasn't gotten necessarily worse than it was. Arguably, though, with social media, it has. That's another thing we could spend 2 hours on. And I know we won't, but I feel for people that are suffering because of their isolation during the pandemic.
Well, I think of even just in my own circle, like my mother, my stepdad passed away the June before the pandemic. So my mom had just barely grappled with living on her own for 6-7 months. And then she's all of a sudden having to not leave her house and not interact with society. Right. And, I saw that the effect that had and various other people. Melanie Martin, my co-host, was living by herself in a 200 square foot apartment. And, she's, she, again, like the effect that had on her. Now, luckily she's, we're pals, and she's a resilient person. So, I think she's actually come out the better for it, which has been good. She's, found love and a few other things too, which she's detailed on previous podcasts. And of course on our radio show on Big 101 in Barrie. But yeah, that's a huge thing. You're right. And again, the pandemic has had a lot of effect on our day to day, but the long-term effect is still yet to be seen, right? Like in terms of mental health and the trickle down of the economy.
You couldn't be more right. I do feel you mentioned your mom and dad. I feel especially bad for older people that are in the last phase of their life, in that some of them will have spent the last year or two in isolation. Yeah. What a way to go out. It's super sad, and I feel for the families of those people, but especially for those people.
Yeah. Wow. As individuals and individuals who want to have their own autonomy over their own lives, to have that, taken away, and that's tough. And yeah, and I mean, like, heck, even thinking about myself way down the road, like, oh, I'll have to be shuffled off to a home sometime too, and how would I feel about, like, first of all, giving up that autonomy to go into a long-term care home as a senior citizen, but then secondly, to then all of a sudden turn around and have to be just isolated in that, like, that's you're doubling down on giving up your freedom and your autonomy to do things, right? It's just a horrifically depressing. But some people prefer the isolation. And the person that I'm going to bring up here when we were talking about rock and roll lifestyles is Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead. And, I read an article where Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters was visiting Lemmy and hanging out at his house here. And, I mean, we hear again about that rock and roll lifestyle, and it always sounded so fantastic when it was being reported in the headlines and things like that. But this is Lemmy, living in his own filth, living in an small apartment, surrounded by stacks of magazines. This is how Dave Grohl described it. I was shocked at how fucking disgusting it was. These aisles of magazines and VHS tapes stacked 3 to 4 feet high. Lemmy sitting on the couch in his black bikini underwear with a spider web on them after just dyeing his hair black, doing a phone interview with a video game on pause on the television. It was 11:15 in the morning. And he offered me a drink, and I said, sure. I'll never forget the detail that day. Not even the black underwear with a spider web and a black widow spider right where his dick is. You know, I mean, it's told in a funny manner. It's told in a funny story, but, you know, I know people less famous than Lemmy, and we go back to the Hamilton music scene, you know, people who are roadies for Teenage Head, you know, people who were, you know, in the punk scene in Hamilton when they were in the 80s, you know, in the 70s and 80s, and now where are they now? They live in a small smoke-filled apartment. You know, you can't tell what time it is, and you know, and they don't leave their house. They just sit there in this smoke-filled room, you know, and that's the part of the rock and roll lifestyle that I don't think a lot of people hear about.
Well, self-imposed isolation is never going to be something that goes away, pandemic or no pandemic.
Exactly.
These are personal choices. They have a lot to do with the way you grew up as a small child. They have a lot to do with people you choose to hang out with. They aren't specific to being a musician. There are postmen and accountants and entrepreneurs and millionaires that can live that way too. Looks can be deceiving. Paychecks can be deceiving. I think that in Lemmy's case, you know, I mean, God love him. I mean, I remember going.
I mean, he was a gem. He was a gem, of course. You know.
I remember going to the record store and seeing the cover of the album with Ace of Spades, and seeing the three of them on the front looking like banditos in the Mexican desert or wherever the hell they were. That scene, that setting. And taking that album home, and The Chase is Better Than the Catch and Ace of Spades. Those are great songs. That's so bold. That's so big. That was rock and roll.
Yeah.
Personified in Lenny Kilmister. However, Lenny was that guy who had a million books and had Nazi paraphernalia, not because he was a Nazi sympathizer, but because he liked collecting weird shit.
Yeah. I know somebody who collects like medieval torture instruments, you know, like, yeah, people like collecting weird stuff. I collect bagpipes. That's weird too.
But these are people's personal choices, aren't they?
That rock and roll lifestyle, you know, I just don't think that people see that side. So it's something I wanted to talk about with you, but that was like the last topic. I should have put that first, because now we're wrapping up on a depressing note, but maybe we can go back to Wildwood Studios, Jeff. You know, the studio looks so cool, and I would love to see it in person. I can't wait.
I can't get a big enough view of the whole room. However, that drum kit does look good. That's my U drums. Let's plug local. The underground drum company U Drum out of Burlington, Ontario, combined with Woods Custom Drums out of Vancouver. There's another Jeff Woods, and he makes drums. So if you're looking for drums, U Drum and Woods Custom Drums are pretty spectacular. I'm equipped with Laney out of England, Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. There's a full circle moment.
Here we are.
Tony Iommi uses Laney amps, and so do I. At Wildwoods Blue. We're at the base of Blue Mountain in beautiful Blue Mountain, Ontario, next to Collingwood. And I do a podcast out of here called Records Rockstars. It's interviews and performances by artists that are emerging. It's different than the radio show, which is narrative. I tell stories like the Old Legends of Classic Rock show. I tell stories and play songs. All of this stuff can be found, and you can find out where to hear it at jeffwoodsradio.com. But the new thing I'm going to do.
Yeah, this was the thing you teased at the start, Jeff. So you've got some plans here.
I'm in conversation with a company that's based around the world, and they have a passion for music and musicians who make it. And we're talking about how we're going to bring that to Wildwoods in a much bigger way than it's already in the radio show and the podcast. So we're going to be doing concerts from here with high production values, 3-camera shoots, and sharing them with the world soon. So I'm excited about that. I'll make an announcement in the next few weeks. Jeff Woods Radio on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Or the website. So
yeah. Oh man, Jeff, you know, I love following what you do. And like I say, I've been hooked on your voice and your stories from a young age, right? So I'll be for sure checking that out. And I encourage anyone else to follow you on all the social platforms.
You're a sweet and kind man. I love your radio show. I love what you and Melanie do. Her podcast is great too.
Yes.
I'll keep following you. You follow me, and we'll do this again someday.
Awesome. Jeff Woods on Big Kris Live. Thanks for the follow and checking out the live stream here. And we'll chat again, Jeff. And thank you again for being the guest today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.